Hello everyone, and welcome back to my third video in my Revelation series. Today, I'm going to be reading Revelation 1, 9 through 16. First, reading verses 9 through 11. I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Jesus, was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. On the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, which said, Write on a scroll what you see, and send it to the seven churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Here in these verses, John gives us some background about where he is when writing this final book of the Bible. And he also prefaces what books 2 and 3 will be about in verse 11, talking about how the Lord told him to send what he saw to the seven churches listed and a letter to all of them. Verses 12 and 13 read, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and when I turned I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. Here is where John begins speaking on the visions that he received, starting with a vision of 7 lampstands and Jesus Christ, mentioned as like a son of man. The 7 lampstands here, we can assume, are the 7 churches that John just mentioned. And actually, as we read to the end of chapter 1, we will see that Jesus says this to be true after he talks to John within the vision. Rounding it out with verses 14 through 16, they read, His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing stars. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in all of its brilliance. The end of verse 13, as well as verses 14 through 16, all describe how Jesus looks within this vision, and talk about what he contains, including 7 stars in his right hand, and a double-edged sword protruding from his mouth. One key detail that I want to talk about here is the final line of verse 16, which says, His face was like the sun shining in all of its brilliance. This is one thing that will also get talked about later on in Revelation, but it leads to the point that when we live in eternity with God in the new heavens and new earth, there will be no sun that we see today. God in his glory will be the source of light across the entire earth in all domains, and that will be the only light that we need in our life.